If you're like me and you've drawn since you were young, you probably had a phase where your art was pretty awkward. This, of course, could mean a variety of things, but I'm leaning more towards just where you're figuring out your art style and figuring out, basic anatomy. And there's just that point, especially where you're a young artist, you have your life ahead of you to continue to work on developing that skill, so it's not like there's an immediate rush to be a better artist. I've always been pretty accepting that it comes with time and practice, and just the more you draw, the better you get at it. It's as simple as that. But regardless, you still strive to make the best art you can with what you have. And even then, if you're anything like me and you're going through that awkward stage of puberty and being a giant anime and cartoon nerd at the same time, you're going to make some art that's awkward in another sense. So that's where my first story comes in today. I always drew girls over guys. Like 9.99% of the time, it was girls that I would be drawing. That's because I grew up in the 2000s and 2010s and I only had a sister, so the kinds of media I was watching was Barbie and Polly Pocket and Winx and Monster High. There was something about female designs that just really drew me to them. They were girly and frilly and pretty, and sometimes none of that. They could also be edgy and cool and can take a whole different approach that wasn't traditional. I could and probably should make a video on why I prefer drawing girls over guys, because it genuinely, there's a lot to the subject, but there is just something about female designs and media targeted towards young girls that just made me excited to draw just only girl designs. The other thing about myself when I was a young artist is that I only drew on like copier paper, and sometimes I would leave my drawings laying around, and so one day my mom got her hands on a drawing she was not so excited to see, because again, I was getting older and I was watching myself change, and I was also exposed to just what it means to grow up. So like, I just started drawing curvier women. To me, it wasn't an issue, it was being more anatomically correct versus just drawing the same body type over and over, no difference between male or female. It wasn't what I wanted to be as an artist. What I wanted was to start mimicking more the things that inspired me, whether it was Winx or Monster High or Barbie. Though they didn't have very many diverse body types, I still could kind of differentiate in my art curvier and thinner girls, and as long as it was a girl and I could give her cool hair and a cool outfit, I was happy. I also think this was one of my earliest expressions of my bisexuality. Honestly, it's something I've kind of known my whole life, but like, this was how I really just expressed it from a young age, and this was just kind of how I showed my appreciation for women and the female body. But this video is called How My Art Was Discouraged as a Kid, so it's obviously not going in the most positive direction. I will hand it to my younger self. I really, despite the fucking scrutiny that's about to come, I stuck to who I was, and I never stopped drawing in the way I wanted. So at least there's that. So growing up in my household, art wasn't discouraged, but it was also something I mostly kept to myself because it was a hobby I did for myself. My parents would show occasional interest at what I was drawing, and my dad was relatively chill. My mom, on the other hand, liked to make her opinions known, and she was not the biggest fan. We had our household phones, and she would walk around talking on them all day to her friends, to her mother, to whoever would listen. That was just her thing. She would sit outside in the garden, chat on the phone. She would sit inside while we were watching TV, chat on the phone. As annoying as it was, you could pick up on a lot of information from it, and honestly, that's how I found out a lot about my mom, is just eavesdropping on her phone calls. But I'm sorry if you're talking on a phone super loud in a shared space, then you're just inviting other people to know your business. What first started is I noticed contention when I was drawing. My mom would act really nosy and come look over my shoulder and see what it was, and I was starting to pick up that she had an issue with the contents of what I was drawing. Then I started noticing that my drawings were disappearing. Some that had openly been sitting out and around the house, and others that had been away in my bedroom. Now, I was a kid and my mom had shitty communication skills. So I wasn't interpreting that the way I was drawing could be perceived as offensive because I drew girls that had ass and tits. Oh, fucking boo-hoo. But it was. And I found out the hard way when I overheard my mom on the phone one day. Our house had a lot of bulky furniture, and I remember being in one of the main rooms, sitting on the floor drawing near a couch, and hearing her walk around, not really knowing the location of where I was and not really being concerned, but complaining to her friend about my art and how it's immoral and concerning that I'm drawing in this way. I remember being stunned with embarrassment and feeling like I did something so horribly wrong, but fortunately it didn't last long, and even a week later I heard her complaining to her mom, which was my grandmother, and I realized that it really just didn't matter. And honestly, that's something that I came to learn over the course of the rest of my life, is that my mom just wanted to find things to complain about and be upset about, and so once upon a time that was my art, and it still potentially could be to this day, but I don't care. Actually, in recording this video, I remembered another instance in which my mom got mad at anatomy, and in the name of gender equality, it was actually about a male I was drawing. This was a few years later. I was attending my grandmother's funeral. It was at a church that had an art room. So once upon a time, I had 3 alien OCs. One of them was the analytical one, kind of like the Simon of the group. One of them was the more outgoing social one, but he was also kind of feminine, and he was more like the Alvin of the group. And then one of them was just kind of aloof and the comedy character, and he was the Theodore of the group. Well, being at my grandmother's funeral, which was lasting like a day long, I was hanging out in the art room and I drew the feminine alien. I took it back to the table that my parents were sitting at. I didn't directly show them like, oh hey, look what I drew. They just brought it up, and they were probably relieved that no one was socializing at that point and it was just my inner family, because they looked a little closer at the drawing, and when I told them that it was a male's design, they specifically pointed at a certain place, the crotch area, and said, "What the fuck is that?" Yes, that's right, they were hyper-analyzing the bulge. It wasn't an out-of-place bulge, it wasn't even a big bulge, it was just a space where I drew to gap the legs. Also, I was like 14. I was not going to be like Picasso, okay? But I just found it really weird throughout my childhood that anytime I drew a character with just human features, it's the human body, or I guess alien body if we're talking about that last example, but it was just a body, and I didn't like that every time that my art was looked at with a critical eye by my mom specifically, it was sexualized. I'm sympathetic and understanding to a degree that she grew up in another time, but I just think it's crazy that I'm such an open-minded individual and I came from that kind of environment. That was probably mostly credited to my dad, even though this next example is where he curbed my art a little bit. So going back to drawing inspiration from Monster High, I wanted to create something in which essentially I wanted to design famous slasher characters as Monster High girls. But almost anytime I drew something, I committed to it and I gave them stories and personalities, so it was a project I was working on for at least a few months. Basically, I did a lot of research to nail down, what a Chucky-inspired design would look like and what a Ghostface-inspired design would be, and a Jason-inspired, Freddy Krueger, all the classics. My dad was a very busy man with his job, but occasionally he would slow down and ask me about my life, and one day it just lined up that I was working on this project and he asked me about it. So after months of build-up and excitement and dedication to drawing these characters, I showed him. I waited for his reaction and it was less than enthused, where he simply said, "They kill people, right?" Really? Oh my gosh, gasp. Slasher killers kill people? But again, that similar feeling came up where I was being made to feel like my art was so immoral. My dad was religious, but he also was the one I binge-watched American Horror Story with. Seriously, we would sit around and watch all of the early seasons together, and those ones did not shy away from dark horror aspects. But it wasn't just that. We watched anything and everything together, and damn, he's the man who raised me on South Park. So whether it's murder or gore or blood or dark themes or inappropriate themes and adult themes, I was exposed to it all. So why is it I make a simple cartoony female design inspired by slasher movie characters that it's bad? I also think I've always been really good at separating reality and fiction, so when I look at someone like Jason or Michael Myers, I don't see an actual killer, I see a character. In their movies, if they're stabbing someone and oh no, they're bleeding out, no they're not, that's fucking corn syrup. Anyway, after working on that project for so long, to just be kind of dismissed like that was shitty, but it made me evaluate, like, our darker themes in art, you know, portraying fictional killers. Is it really that bad? Am I really just an evil little kid because I like doing things like that? That was something I had to ask myself, and just like the thing with the anatomy with my mom, eventually I got over it. But I'm here talking about it today, so obviously to some degree it stuck. Moving on, the last story of this video takes us to the American public school system. I want to say it was about 3rd grade. I was indeed the class artist. I was honestly pretty obsessive about it and sketching at any moment I could. My 3rd grade teacher was so sweet and very encouraging. She had suggested that I make a class portrait. While there was nearly 25 of us total with all students and the teacher, it would be a hefty task, but one I wanted to take up. At this point, my hopes and dreams were not quite crushed and I actually enjoyed school. So on a giant piece of poster board from the dollar store, I started sketching out and outlining and coloring the picture of my classmates. It took a few weeks and the picture essentially looked like a playground scene where there was a giant tree and everyone was gathered around it doing something kind of different on the playground. So I finished it up, presented it to my teacher, and she hung it on the classroom door. It was a proud moment, yet kind of embarrassing that every time someone came to our classroom, they would see my art on the door. But it was the end of the year, and it was a nice way to just wrap it all up and be like, this was my class. This was my 3rd grade class. This was everyone I saw every single day I went to school. I was a happy little 3rd grader. It was an innocent piece of art. However, I want to say about a week later, we were sitting in class, just doing normal busy work, and my teacher called me out into the hallway, which is never a fun sign. She had basically alluded to the fact that she got a complaint about the way I portrayed some of the classmates on the poster, and just asked me if I could erase it and change their appearance ever so slightly. Now, what was the problem with these drawings? I drew 3 of my male classmates in cheerleader outfits, but I had put them in skirts. I was a kid and ignorant to certain gender norms. I just liked the design of the cheerleading outfits. It wasn't malicious. I didn't really even have any beef with any of the boys that I had portrayed as cheerleaders. Being a sensitive little 3rd grader, I do remember crying because I felt bad that I had maybe hurt someone's feelings with the way I portrayed them in art. And that offset part of the reason that I still hate drawing others to this day. Like, anytime anyone would ask me to draw them growing up, I gave so much hesitation because that was just one of my core art memories, is feeling like I wronged someone with how I portrayed them. All in good fun though, because it was just cheerleading outfits for a cartoony class drawing, but ultimately it was just something I had to change and I accepted it. I just wondered who was the one that had a problem with it. The 3rd grade boys that didn't want to be in skirts, or maybe since it was parent-teacher conference week, one of the more conservative parents who, no, cannot have boys in skirts. Anyway, yeah. This was just a unscripted video talking from memory. I've wanted to make this one for a long time. I think it covers some interesting themes, but it's just ways I was discouraged, and honestly, a lot of the stuff I was discouraged from doing, I currently do in my art, whether that's just because it's who I am, or I think it honestly is kind of a giant middle finger to the fact that a lot of what I still like to draw is what I was discouraged from. But for the artists out there, have you guys ever been discouraged from drawing a particular thing? Do you have any core art memories? I mean, it is such an interesting topic. So if you have any stories of your own or any experiences you want to share, do feel free to comment them below. But yeah, thank you for being here. Bye!